Abraham Kuyper, I will give to you in a very summarized way now, but in the afternoon, I'll present to you his entire life. Okay, with hopefully a PowerPoint that will be behaving so that you can see pictures of the Netherlands, pictures of him growing up, and pictures of what he was doing and so on the screen. But for now, let's see how this thing is working. So he lived between 1837 and died in 1920. So he crossed the century. He is well known for having become a prime minister of the Netherlands, which basically is not like a prime minister in Zambia. It's basically a ruler. So it's like the prime minister of England. He also founded a denomination that was called the Reformed Churches in the Netherlands. He founded a university as well, and he also founded a political party that was called the Anti-Revolutionary Party. And later on you will understand why he preferred that name, Anti-Revolutionary Party. I think in terms of what I needed to say here about him, that should be sufficient. Okay, so this is the individual that we are thinking about in terms of what were his thoughts. And in this particular case, it is about the family, or sphere sovereignty is the wider term. Remember, it was introduced yesterday, but today, in this session, we are primarily thinking in terms of the family. And the best way to do this is to say that most of our material is coming from what is called the Stone Lectures. Now, the Stone Lectures were given by him. He was in the Netherlands, but he was invited to America to go and present these lectures. And basically, he presented at the Princeton Seminary, and there he presented lectures. There were 6 of them altogether on the subject of Calvinism. The topic, the definition that was given by Dr. Bokam yesterday, not simply on salvation, but in the wider sense. What was the impact of the Reformation, the 16th century Reformation, on the whole of life? What is it that changed? Now, prior to the Reformation, so my next point here would have been how things were before the Reformation. Basically, the church sought to control everything and was in head-on collision with the state or the governments that were around that part of the world, around the Mediterranean Sea, which was the area that was largely developed at that time. So there were 2 controlling churches. One was called the Western Church, which was under the Roman Catholic Pope, and then there was the Eastern Church that was really on its own, using the Greek language, while the Roman Catholic Church was using the Latin as its primary mode of communication. So these 2 basically controlled everything else that was happening in society. So for instance, the universities were under their control. You could not teach anything that the church did not want you to teach. The families were under the control of the church as well. So for instance, if you rebelled against the state, rather against the church, all the church would do is to say to the priests, don't marry them. And therefore you couldn't marry. Can you imagine? I decide you shouldn't marry. the implications of all that, I probably would be chased off Dream Valley right away. But in those days, the church controlled what was happening there. Even putting a president or prime minister to rule over you, the church had to endorse that person. Otherwise, that person would not be allowed to rule. So that was the situation prior to the Reformation of the 16th century. Well, I was going to quote Kuyper here, but I think I've made the point, so let me move on. So the family itself was under the control of the church. However, Kuyper, first of all, asserts the fact that every human being must be under God. Not necessarily under the church, but must be under God. Every individual. It doesn't matter what sphere it is that you are operating in, because all the spheres that will be discussed, and so far we've heard about the state, we've heard about the church, and we've heard about the family. We'll hear about a few more in a few minutes. But all the spheres, wherever a person is doing anything, it must be with God in mind, and it must be as an act of worship. And this is what he says. I have a lot of words here, but let me see how I can summarize. And I'll keep changing a few words simply because he was quite a deep thinker, and in a sentence says so much, I don't want you to be left behind. Okay, so he says, but it remained the special trait of Calvinism that it placed the believer before the face of God, not only in his church, but also in his personal, family, social, and political life. The majesty of God and the authority of God press upon the Calvinist in the whole of his human existence. And then he says later, love and adoration are to Calvin themselves the motives of every spiritual activity, and thus the fear of God is imparted to the whole life as a reality, into the family, into society, into science and art, into personal life, and into the political career. So his understanding was this, that there's no sphere of your life that you can say that this has got nothing to do with God. This is just me and other people and what we're deciding to do and so on. He is saying that what the Reformation did was, in a way, to say what the Roman Catholic Church was saying, that every aspect of life should be under God. But this time, it is not God, the church, and you. No. The church out of the way, you and God in every aspect of your life. The way you run your home, the way you do everything else. Let's quickly move on. So if that's the case, then what is the point of the state? The government under which we live. Well, Kuyper's understanding was this, that the state came in long after human beings had already come onto the planet. It was not an essential part of human life and living. Rather, the family was. So the family came into existence from the very beginning when Adam and Eve were put into the world. And his argument, therefore, is that the state only comes in because of sin. The consequences of sin bring in the need for the state. And I'm just quickly going to quote him here. He says, for indeed, without sin, there would have been neither magistrate nor state order. But political life, in its completion or entirety, would have evolved itself from the life of the family. So families would have been enough. Husband, wife, and children would have been enough to run the affairs of human beings on earth. Something that is not in the Stone Lectures is that Kuyper had a Trinitarian view of the family. Okay? And it is, there's a husband, there's a wife, and their children. To him, that was the definition of the family. So just keep that in mind. Now, the only legitimate authority on earth, therefore, he says, is the natural family and not the state. Remember, the state comes in because of sin to deal with the issue of order with respect to the world and to punish and defend society. I think we'll hear a little bit more about the state and Dr. Bockham. But the point is that he argued that the state is mechanical. It's not natural. What is natural is the family. There, yes, you come into the world already with a sense of I belong, with a sense of I must obey, with a sense of I am under some authority that cares for me. And that's where it becomes more natural to speak about legitimate authority. Let me try and quickly give, I'm trying to see whether I should quote later or quote here. Okay, so here is his point, and I think you will understand. Why should you obey your father and mother? The answer is quite simple. Well, they brought you into this world. Okay. Yeah. They fed you from the time you were a little baby. You were 100% dependent on them. So it makes sense that God should be expecting you to obey them. Let's change the picture a little bit. Again, I'm straying into Dr. Bockham's sphere. Why should you obey HH? Why? Just because some people voted for him? What if tomorrow they vote for Charles Banda? So you start obeying him? So there's a way in which, for that one, you begin to process. You begin to think that the reason why I am now obeying this person is because as society together, we have made a social contract. And in that social contract, we have agreed that we have a political leader over these boundaries that we refer to as Zambia. And therefore, I must obey. I remember just a few weeks ago, I was in Singapore. And as I was being taken from the airport to the hotel where I was, I asked the taxi driver, I said to him, how do you guys keep this place so clean? In fact, in Singapore, it's illegal to chew chewing gum. It's illegal. Chewing gum, can you imagine? Chewing gum. So anyway, I asked that question. And the taxi driver said, look, in our country, it's very simple. Well, it's really a city, but it's very simple. He said this, you either obey and are happy, or you disobey and you are unhappy, or you disobey and quickly leave the country. Is it just those three choices? You cannot disobey and be happy here. You can't. And he said, we've learned this over time, And that's why all this is so beautiful. You cannot see a piece of paper on the ground in Singapore. You can't. Well, let's quickly move on. The point there is that we've agreed. We choose a leader and we obey him. But it is natural in the family, very natural, because of the reasons I gave earlier on. So, the point that Kuyper makes is that there are different spheres of life that must look after themselves, because God has put into them a natural way of viewing things. And that natural way precedes the coming in of the state. Okay, so if you were to look at the book of Genesis, for instance, you will find that the state comes in later, around chapter 6 of Genesis going forward. Prior to that, it is all around families and clans and so forth. Long before you start finding the word king and king and king this and king that. Any of you who's got a Bible and you are able to do, or some of you could just Google, but search when first the word king appears in your Bible. Anybody? You sharp guys. Others, even though I've said that, they're still. But thankful, there are some of you who are quick. Where does it first appear? Yeah. You don't have the gadgets, guys. Huh? Yes, finally. Somebody there. Natasha. No, that's too far away. What happened to you? Yes, somebody at the back. 14. Hello? Genesis 14. Okay, so, although I would have thought it was earlier, but anyway, that's still good enough. As you can see, it's far, far down in Genesis. Whereas, where does the family first appear? I mean, not that you find the word family, but where does it first appear? Chapter 1, there we are. Okay, so the family was already imbued with these capacities. Long before nations were formed in that sense, and they began to have kings over them. Now, here's what Kuyper says. Listen to this. This is very important as we proceed. In a Calvinistic sense, we understand hereby that the family, and then he goes further, the business, science, art, and so forth are all social spheres which do not owe their existence to the state or do not derive the law of their life from the superiority of the state, but instead, listen to this, obey a high authority within their own bosom. In other words, in the very nature of their existence, they owe their own authority there. And then it says, an authority which rules by the grace of God, just as the sovereignty of the state does. And later on, I think I'll use examples of the other spheres as we are looking at the family, especially because the other spheres are not part of the discussion of this weekend. Okay, so just please bear that in mind, that he's talking in terms of all these independent spheres that pre-existed the nation or the state or the government. Now, here is where I was particularly interested, and here I'll do quite a bit of a quote. And it is this, that rule in the family is organic, whereas that of the state is mechanical. So let me quickly read, because the point is well made, and I hope after this it will be easier for you to understand. So he says here, It is here of the highest importance, sharply to keep in mind, the difference in grade between the organic life of society, notice the organic life of society, and the mechanical character of the government. Now, let me quickly try and explain the difference between the two. Okay. If my car breaks down and it's the carburetor that's gone wrong, I can go to a mechanic and using a spanner, he will remove the carburetor. Okay? Are we together? And he can take it for fixing. He can even get a carburetor from another car that's like mine, which has been brought for fixing, and lend that carburetor to me because I've got an emergency trip to Kabwe. I need to go today. He can get it, give it to me, and say, go, when you come back tomorrow, I'll fix yours, we will swap. That's a mechanical attachment. Okay? A mechanical connection. Now let's change the picture a little bit. Let's suppose I have injured my arm here, and it's a big sore, and I go to see a doctor. But I have an interview in Kabwe tomorrow. Can I say to the doctor, but doctor, please, if you could just disconnect my arm and lend me one, I'll come and collect it tomorrow. I've got an interview in Dolo or Kabwe. Can I do that? I can't. Why? Because it's an organic connection. There are no screws in between. There are no screws. There's no actual place where you can say, my torso ends here, and then the arm begins after this next cell of my skin. So we can cut here clearly, and we'll separate the arm from the rest. There's nothing like that. It's an ongoing organic connection. Are we understanding now the difference between organic and mechanic? Okay, so let me now quickly read this. Whatever among men originates directly from creation is possessed of all the data for its own development in human nature as such. Okay, so all he's saying is that which is coming from creation is organic. It's inevitable. And then he comes to the family. He says, you see this at once in the family and in connection with blood relations and other ties. From the duality of man and woman, marriage arises. That's natural. Okay. The two shall become one. Exactly. Now, he goes on to say, from the original existence of one man and one woman, monogamy comes forth. In other words, it's only natural that there should only be one man, one woman in marriage. It's only natural. He continues, the children exist by reason of the innate power of reproduction. Naturally, the children are also connected as brothers and sisters. It's natural that a man and a woman, when they get married, will have children, will want to have them. It's natural. They will reproduce children. It's natural by their very organs. And then when you produce the children in the home, they naturally relate as brother and sister. It's natural. And when by and by these children in their turn marry again, what happens? Exactly the same thing. As a matter of course, they will continue having children, but more than that, those families that are coming from there, what begins to happen as they are related? There is blood relations. They have a certain natural relationship. Although they are different homes, but they feel connected. They'll be referring to you, uncle, auntie. This is my cousin. It's my cousin, this one. It's my cousin. It's a natural relationship. And he says here, That there is nothing mechanical there. Nothing. The development is natural and so forth. Okay, so I'll skip everything else that it says. Let's run along. Now, what he goes on to say there is this. That the family, or rather what we are seeing in the family, is true of all the other, listen to this, natural spheres. With all the other natural spheres, it's exactly the same. There are innate principles that God has put into them that governs the way they think, governs the way in which they relate, governs the way in which they do things. And the family is one of them. So the reason why I'm coming to this is because he introduces all, well, not all, but a number of the other spheres. So listen to what he says. In relation herewith, and on entirely the same ground of organic, notice that word, superiority, there exists side by side with this personal sovereignty, the sovereignty of the sphere, the university exercises scientific dominion. So what he's saying there is that the very nature of a university, this learning context, demands that it functions on its own, dealing with issues of learning. Because there are certain scientific laws that go with the educational process, that goes with those specific areas of study that the university context is able to deal with rather than the state. He speaks about the Academy of Fine Arts is possessed of art power. So let's also go to art. Art being things like music, drawings, acting, and all the rest of it, communication. All those have also got their own laws, God-given laws that are natural. You can't impose from the outside just because you are president of the country. Okay? I don't know much about music, but you talk about octaves, right? Okay. So that means, is that 8 or something? Powerful. I'm remembering a few things. Okay, now here's the point. I can't as president just decide that instead of stopping at 8, we'll stop at 10. After all, I'm president. You can't. It's put into the realm of music by God himself. It's natural. You can't impose. So he gives a few other examples. I'll give you one more. And it's the guild exercised a technical dominion. So what he means by that is this, that you will find that architects together, engineers together, lawyers together, and so on, different disciplines or professions, are the best people to come together and say, these are the natural laws that govern the things we do. The God-given natural laws. And therefore, this is how we should dictate the way we function, according to those laws. So again, government cannot just come in and impose. Government must respect these institutions, which in Zambia is what has happened. So if you're an engineer, you must belong to this body of engineers, because together you are able to determine how you should behave, how you should run things and so on, because you are a guild, you function under the same realm. So architects are the same. I'm not exactly sure which other spheres. Doctors also come together and so forth. Okay, so those bodies are to function together. He says this, he mentions a number of other areas, trade unions and so on. But let me quickly quote this. Behind these organic spheres, okay, so let me think of engineering, since I'm an engineer from my background. The way we engineers think, you can't impose from outside in, because strictly speaking, we follow, well, they call them natural laws, but really they are God's laws. So for instance, I'm a mining engineer by profession. You can't just drill anywhere and make a hole. You die down there. Okay? There are laws about geology that you have to follow if you're going to have safe holes underground. So together as mining engineers, we can be talking about how we should ensure that mining is safe and we are getting to the copper and everything else. But here's the point. There will be pollution coming from the smelter. Government will want to regulate that because it is affecting so many other people around. So it's that understanding that you have to bear in mind. Now, here's the point. Behold, these organic spheres with intellect, aesthetical, and technical sovereignty, which I've just explained with the miners. The sphere of the family opens itself with its rights of marriage, domestic peace, education, and possession. Let me finish what it says here. I'll skip something in between. Paternal authority, which is the authority of the fathers in the family, roots itself in the very lifeblood and is proclaimed in the 5th commandment. And so also finally, it will be remarked that the social life of cities and villages, so that's an extension of the family. So there's the family, then the clan, then the village, which is the wider community in which this family is expanding, and then finally the town or city or whatever it is. Okay, so it's going outward. So the social life of cities and villages forms a sphere of existence which arises, notice, from the very necessities of life, and which therefore must be autonomous. It's natural. It must be respected. Now there are 4 things he mentions here that I don't want us to miss. When he speaks about the family, he says, with its right, number 1, of marriage. So that is in the hands of the family. Number 2, domestic peace, ensuring that within the context of the home, there's the atmosphere that enables children to thrive. 3, education, that the families are in charge of the way their children are being educated. They're in charge. Again, government cannot just impose there. And then lastly, possessions. The family possesses property. It's not the state. The state can't just grab property and say, no, it now belongs to us. No. It belongs to families, husband and wife and their children, and in generations to come, they are passing these on. Okay, so just keep that in mind when we are thinking about the sovereignty of that sphere called family. That there are these aspects that the state cannot take away because it came afterwards. The family was already in place. Okay, so I need to make sure I hurry here. I've got about 15 minutes. I love what it says here. And therefore, let me quickly quote this. He says, neither the life of science nor of art. So notice he's giving spheres here. Science, art, nor of agriculture, nor of industry, nor of commerce, nor of navigation, nor of the family, nor of human relations may be coerced to suit itself to the grace of government. So, the family has been mentioned here among many other things. And it is the fact that it mustn't be forced into subjection to something else. But I love this phrase. I hope I'm not stealing too much from Dr. Bokam. But here is the phrase I really love. He says, the state must never become an octopus which stifles the whole of life. Everything being controlled from State House. You know, the Chinese, a few years ago, decided that we need to reduce numbers. It was the Chinese government. So, no family would be allowed to have more than one child. Only one child per family. How? Who gave you that power? To determine that each family should only have one child. Who? That's an overstepping. And because these things are natural, remember what we're saying, it's natural, it's organic. What people began to do, those with money, is when the wife is pregnant, they would go to places like Singapore or South Korea or somewhere nearby to go and have the child. Because it's illegal. Once you, in China itself, once you have one child, you can't have two or more. That was the good side. The bad side is that they would test to find out whether the child is male or female. And when they find out that it's female, they kill. Very sad. But what happened in the process now is that, yes, the population was going down, but part of the reason why it was going down now was that there were too many men, no women, to marry. Yeah, because each family wanted to have a man so that their own name and heritage and everything could continue, and now there were no women to marry. So you cannot mechanically control. Leave it to the bedroom. Shouldn't go into that bedroom. And what's happening there? Are we together? Sure. Okay. Because some of you will be presidents soon. I don't want to come and hear, if I'll still be around, that you are now determining what's happening in the bedroom. Okay. Don't be an octopus. Okay, quickly. Another point that he makes, which you would have seen if this was working, is that it is the duty of the family, therefore, to refuse to accept that kind of infringement. Okay? It's the duty of the family to struggle for its own liberty so that it is under God. Okay, so let me hurry on to my conclusion. Well, there are two more points that I'll make after my conclusion, but I'll make them after because they're not part of the Stone lectures. This is what Kuyper says about Calvinism, or as Dr. Bokam yesterday said, the Reformation. Think of it that way. And its impact upon the whole of life. He says Calvinism did not stop at church order, in other words, how the church should function, but expanded in a life system. In other words, how the whole of life should function. The whole of life. And did not exhaust its energy in a dogmatic construction, but it created a life and world view. How should we view the whole of life? And as such, it fitted everything in such a way that it helped with human development in every department of life. It raised our Christian religion to its highest spiritual splendor. It created a church order which became the pre-formation of state confederation. It proved to be the guardian angel. Okay, so I should have put a full stop there. It proved to be a guardian angel of science. Okay, so science was then given the rails on which it could progress and go forward. It emancipated art. So the artists were now able to be free without constantly peeping at the church, wondering what the church is going to say as they are developing their art. They were realizing we are accountable to God. It propagated a political scheme which gave birth to constitutional government both in Europe and America. We've dealt with that. It fostered agriculture and industry, commerce and navigation. You remember the question I asked Dr. Bokam yesterday. The Protestant work ethic was produced out of all that. It put a thorough Christian stamp upon home life and family ties. You could now understand husband-wife relations, children to parents, cousins and aunties, and the wider flowing of the clans and so on, growing further and further. It gave it a sense of direction. It promoted through its high moral standard purity in our social circles. And on he goes. That last point brings me to the first of my concluding remarks, and it is the fact that when he was speaking about these spheres being independent, remember, he was thinking of them being independent under God. Under God. Now that's crucial. Under God. So he did not therefore say that we could do whatever we want. And because of that, he really bemoaned, that is Kuyper, really bemoaned what was happening in France, where it is true they were able to fight so that they are not under the suffocating arm of the church, but in the process they went all the way to throw away this biblical worldview. And so there was gross immorality, especially sexual immorality, that was now destroying life itself as it ought to be. So in that sense, he bemoaned it. Pornography became rife, family life was being destroyed, and he was saying that's not what the Reformation was meant to produce. It was meant to produce a life that is under God, and we are all relating to one another. One extra area that I thought I could also mention is with respect to the issue of education. So one of the points he makes is that schools must be under parents. So parents must develop schools where they then take their children. But at the same time, he protects that sphere as well of education. And he says that the parents must let the teachers as professionals developing education under God to have it as their sphere. So you've got your family, you are handling things there, but in the school, respect the teachers as well who are under God. Just the way in which you respect the architect. What do? You say, look, this is the kind of home I want. And the engineer, then you respect them. As they do the final drawings, you also respect the engineer as he begins the work. You don't start going there and start saying, I don't like the mixture of concrete here. 3 parts to 5. I want 3 to 10 so that I can save my money. Well, you know what's going to happen soon after that, don't you? Yeah. So he's basically making the argument that be in charge of the ethos, but allow the professionals to do their work. And then lastly, and with that I must end, thank you very much. I've got 2 minutes. 2 minutes. It's that was Kuyper's view of developing decentralization. He was very opposed to a situation where one man sitting, if we can speak about Zambia, in State House is now controlling everything. That's a very dangerous way to live. So he viewed it that you must go back to the smallest unit of society. And the smallest unit of society to Kuyper was not the individual, it was the family. The family. That was the smallest unit. You go back there, and then the families are working together in a clan. And then in that clan, they have a natural leadership because it's a grandfather or great-grandfather or whatever who is leading everybody. And then from there, you go on to the village, and the village is comprising the wider circle of families, and they are determining how they function. And then step by step, it's going to the state. And each of these spheres is being allowed to run its affairs under God, and then I'll leave the state to be handled by Dr. Bokam. And the point being made there then is don't destroy what is at the bottom there in the family. And then also, there's a social contract. You've given the sword to the state. Don't handle the sword in the family. You can spank the rod, but don't handle the sword because it's in the social contract that you have handed over. Okay, sorry, you took my time for Q&A, but I've taken my time for speaking. With that, I end.